You're listening to Girls with Graft, a burn community podcast created by Phoenix Society for Burn Survivors, a leading nonprofit dedicated to supporting the burn community. In this podcast, we'll talk with burn survivors, share resources to help with supporting and improving burn recovery, and discuss how to prevent burn injuries. Here are your hosts, burn survivors and Phoenix Society's marketing team, Amber Wilcox and Rachel Kudlak.
Hello and welcome back to Girls with Grafts. I am Rachel Kudlak. I'm one of the hosts of the podcast. And unfortunately today I will not be joined by my lovely co-host, Amber Wilcox. But that's okay because I have a really awesome guest that's joining me today. I'm so excited to have this special episode in honor of Fire Prevention Week. Since 1922, NFPA has sponsored the public observance of Fire Prevention Week, and this year is focused all on smoke alarms. So we'll dive more into this year's theme with our guests. So let's go ahead and get started. But first, let me give a quick special shout out to today's podcast sponsor. So today's podcast is powered by Summit Fire and Security. Summit Fire and Security is your trusted partner for all your fire protection and life safety needs. From fire extinguishers and alarms to security systems, suppression solutions, and special hazard protection, Summit Fire and Security supports you at every stage, from design and installation to ongoing maintenance and inspections. You can ensure your business is fully protected and compliant with Summit Fire and Security by your side. So you can learn more about them by visiting summitfiresecurity.com. So without further ado, let me introduce today's guest who knows all about Summit Fire and Security. So with a robust 22-year tenure in the fire protection industry, Steve Rice brings a wealth of experience to the table. Currently serving as the operations manager of the installation department at Summit Fire and Security in Cleveland, Ohio, he has been instrumental in overseeing all installs and major repairs in Northern Ohio since 2005. Previously, he worked as a fire protection systems installer for custom engineered fire systems. He holds many specialized trainings and certifications, and you can learn all about those trainings as well as his full bio in our show notes. Thank you so much, Steve, for joining me today.
Hi, Rachel. How are you doing? Good morning.
Good morning. Well, I'm so excited to have you on, especially since it is Fire Protection Week. So I know I just read your bio, and I didn't go into all your certifications, of course, but do you just mind sharing a little bit more about yourself and your role at Summit Fire and Security?
Sure. So Summit Fire and Security, I started off as a technician, and I kind of worked my way up through the ranks to just a service manager to an operations manager, which is where I am currently. What I do is I oversee the entire installation department. So anywhere from sprinklers to security to fire alarm to special hazards. Special hazards would be like fire suppression systems in computer rooms, things like that, industrial systems, CO2 systems, what they called halon systems, things like that. So I have a couple estimators that are underneath me that I work with every day to make sure that we're quoting the customer the right way. And I basically see the projects from beginning to end. I have technicians that report to me specifically and schedule them, make sure everybody's out there. And I even go out into the field every once in a while and still do some work myself. It's kind of hard to get out of the field once you've been in the field. So try to stay relevant and, keep doing some things out there.
Definitely. Well, like I've already mentioned, it is Fire Protection Week and or Fire Prevention Week, and this year's theme is smoke alarms, make them work for you. So all week long on our social media, on Summit's Facebook and social as well, we'll be sharing so much information about smoke alarms and how to keep you and your family safe. But, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about, your role with fire alarms and smoke alarms, and especially how that relates to the commercial space.
Sure. So basically, in our office, we work almost exclusively in commercial spaces. We don't do much residential. Sometimes we will work in a residential house, but more if it's a really large house, a mansion, some, crazy house you'd see on TV. They actually are more like industrial and commercial buildings than houses. They have huge basements with, large industrial equipment that needs protection, different than you would in your standard home. But that's kind of few and far between. Most of our work is in industrial space. We do a lot of work in big box stores. We do a lot of manufacturing work, restaurants, all over the place, large warehouses, Amazon warehouses, places like that. Just huge buildings that need special protection.
Yeah, because we've talked a little bit about on this show before in some of our episodes of, especially during this week and awareness week, we're checking our smoke alarms, we're practicing our escape plans at home, but we don't always focus about, when we go out and about and we go out to eat or we go to the movies or going to work in your commercial building. So can you just tell me a little bit, and for our listeners too, about, what kind of regulations there are in terms of the commercial spaces? I mean, I'm sure there's differences too between older buildings and new construction, and just what are things that you look for, and maybe what are some things we should be looking out for too when we're going out and about?
Sure. Get a weird echo, but so as far as regulations go, there's a term that a lot of people like to use where they call it grandfathered in, which is not a technical term. It's more of a just a lingo. But so grandfathered in, what they're actually meaning is that it's an older building that it was designed at a certain time. The codes change throughout the years, and that's one of the things I'm part of. I'm on the NFPA 409 committee, where our goal is to keep the codes up to date with technology, with building designs, with building changes. Specifically, the one that I'm in, it's with aircraft hangars. So as aircraft changes, there's new hazards inside of those hangars. So we have to keep updating, certain things like the code books where, they need to be updated with everything. Kind of like your computer gets updated to, work with the fastest internet, and your cell phones with the fastest 5G and all that. As things go, ahead in time, we have to keep up with the speed. It's a slower process because it's usually every 3 years a new code book comes out. So the regulations are sometimes lagging behind, and sometimes states take some time to actually adopt the new codes. In Ohio recently, we just moved up to the latest and greatest, the 2022 codes for a lot of the NFPA, which is a good thing for us. So that means, we can start maintaining our buildings the right way. But as far as grandfathered in goes, that's something where it was designed in 1972. It was designed with the 1972 codes, so it may not have all these same standards that we would have today. For example, ADA standards, pole station heights. You can go into some buildings and you'll see that the pole stations might be 5 feet in the air, where that would be difficult for somebody in a wheelchair to reach. But that's because it's an older building. They haven't had any renovations, so they haven't lowered the pole stations to the right height. That will happen once they do a major renovation, or if somebody buys it and the occupancy changes or the use type changes of the building. That's when things have to now be brought up to current code. So some older buildings, you could have some issues to a point, but typically the fire department will go through and walk through all the buildings in their city to look and make sure everything is, at least close enough where it's not a danger to anybody. They don't want to put anybody in danger just to save the owner a few dollars. Mm-hmm. They want to keep things going as best as they can.
Mm-hmm, definitely. I know, and I'll make sure this is linked in our show notes below as well. But, we have a great community of Phoenix advocates that, do exactly some of the things you're talking about with coding and making sure even the older buildings, just because they could be grandfathered in doesn't necessarily mean that they can't, upgrade and get some of those newer systems in place. So let's talk a little bit more about Summit Fire and Security. And, you talked a little bit at the beginning of how, your role at the company, but how does Summit really work with, commercial spaces in terms of the designing and installation and maintaining fire systems? Maybe you can just kind of walk us through that process and, from start to finish, just a kind of an overview of what that looks like?
Sure. As far as designing fire alarm systems, there's a few different ways that we even get the information to us. Sometimes we work with an engineering firm where they give us a set of plans that already have all the devices laid out on the drawings for us. And sometimes we're lucky enough where we can pretty much just slap our name on it and submit it to the city and go install the system because the customer already hired an engineering firm to do the design for us. That doesn't guarantee that that design is correct, though. So we have our own in-house designers that will always go through and review anything and make sure, maybe that engineer is from a different city or from a different state, where they might have different rules where they didn't realize, oh, well, we need this and this and this. Or since their design initially happened, they added an elevator over on this side. Well, now we have to add controls for the elevator to shut it down during a fire. So we need to do a very thorough once over of all designs that are sent to us with our NICET level 4 designers to make sure that it's good to go before we submit it to the city for approval. Other times customers just give us an AutoCAD drawing of their building and say, hey, we need a fire alarm system. So we got to start from scratch, which is fine. And again, we've got the design team throughout. Each branch usually has a designer. If not, we'll work together as a group. And is probably the best thing that I love about Summit is we are a huge company as far as fire protection goes. So we have resources throughout the entire country that we've been trying more and more to utilize and create, email groups between everybody that are all the designers in the company. All the operations managers kind of have email groups where they can talk to each other and kind of, play things off of each other. See if we have resources that we can allocate between the company. So when the customer just gives us a drawing, we lay out everything, we lay out all the wires, all the devices, and then we submit it to the city for it to be approved. Worst case scenario, the customer has nothing and they don't even have a drawing of their building. So we literally have to send somebody out to their building, go measure every single wall, go outside, measure all the outside, all the roofs, and get all the heights and everything, and start from scratch and create an entire drawing of their building, and then do the design on top of that. That's what we don't like to do because it's extremely time consuming and ties up resources, and it gets really expensive just because it's so many hours we have to, spend with the customer on that.
For sure.
Other times what we can do is they'll have an existing system with drawings of their fire alarm system, and we're just upgrading their system. Maybe it's an older panel and it's not the latest and greatest. So what we can do is take their drawing, update it with all the newer device types, and then submit it as an existing system, more as what we call a repair than a new install. So once that drawing, however we get it and however we send it, goes to the city, it gets approved, and then we order the parts once the city's okay with it. Get all the parts coming in, and we have two ways to install it. Either we install it ourselves, where we've got technicians, guys in trucks that will go out and pull wire, run conduit, install the devices, test everything, program everything. Or we can work with somebody like an electrical contractor, where we will hire them to go out, or they'll hire us, one way or the other. They'll install the wire. We will do what we call parts and smarts, where we will sell them the devices, because a lot of the devices are proprietary, where only we can buy them. You have to be a distributor. So we'll buy the parts, we'll sell them the design, the parts, and then they'll install everything. We come in at the end and we program it. We test everything. We look over all their work to make sure that they did everything the right way, which they always do. And then we do a final test with the fire department. Test with the fire department includes activating every single device that were installed. We have to actually use what they call smoke in a can to test each smoke detector. We have to set off all the audibles, the horn strobes, things like that. We have to verify that all of the interconnected systems. So there's things like sprinkler systems. So sprinkler systems have what they call water flows on them, where the water flow, it's got a little paddle inside of it, and the paddle moves and it activates a switch. Well, we monitor that switch with the fire alarm system And that lets the fire department know, hey, the sprinkler system's going off. You need to send somebody out there to, take care of the fire. So that's one interconnected system would be a sprinkler system. Another one would be an elevator control system, where if the fire alarm goes off anywhere near the elevators, that brings the elevators down to the first floor. So nobody's stuck in an elevator during an actual fire. There is a way for the fire department to bypass that. And then the fire department, if they deem it safe for them, they can still use the elevator to get where they need to go to make sure everything's safe and help with, rescues and whatnot. Other systems that are connected are smoke control systems. So some large buildings have huge fans up at the roof where it will either blow fresh air into the stairwells to help people escape through the stairwells, or if there's a large ballroom or something like that, it will actually suck the smoke out of the ballroom to help people actually be able to see and escape as well. Trying to think there's something else.
No, to me, I always love learning more about on the commercial side, because like I said, especially during awareness weeks, we get so focused on making sure our home's safe, which is so important, of course. But there's things like the fans you were just talking about and getting, fresh air into the stairwell for people to escape, like things that, average Joes never think about. That are installed and working properly in these commercial spaces as they should.
Right. And that's what we're here for. I mean, it's our job to, learn everything and make sure everything's working. We send all of our technicians through factory training to make sure they know how to use these systems. I mean, they're complicated now. I mean, I've got this one sitting in my office that we set up. It's a newer panel by one of the brands that we sell, and it's just there's so much that goes into it that we have to learn it. I have to learn it as a manager, so I feel comfortable sending my guys to go out and install it. And it's helpful to physically buy one and play with it, set it up, make sure it works correctly, and that way it's a tool for our technicians and a tool for our salespeople as well. So they'll come in here and say, hey, how does that work? Which parts do we need? Because once you go inside of it, there's all sorts of boards and whatnot that, I know what every single thing in here does, where most people don't. And our salespeople don't necessarily know it all, but they come to me to find out, hey, how does this work? What do I need? Give me a list of parts that I need to sell in order to get this system installed correctly. The other interconnected things that we have are hood systems. So like if a building has a restaurant system inside of there, that restaurant system will have a wet chemical system that will put out a fire. So if there's a griddle and maybe somebody's cooking a little too aggressively and all of a sudden it catches on fire, that can propagate and burn an entire building or a restaurant down. Well, we do suppression install systems in there, and those, if there's a fire alarm system in the building, has to be monitored by the fire alarm system. So that's another thing we need to test and make sure that connection is working every year. So if it does go off, hopefully never, but if it does, it's going to enunciate to the right people and make sure that the fire department can get there and take care of things.
That's crazy. All the different, like I said, all the things that I don't think about that.
Right. It's
created and installed.
It's more than, you're just your typical smoke detector and battery that you have to worry about at your house. That's what most people think about with fire alarms, but we've got all sorts of crazy devices. I mean, I could literally turn a coffee pot on with a fire alarm system if I programmed it the right way. So it's pretty neat what you can do.
That's awesome. So I may ask you some, well, they're not dumb to me, but questions that you can instantly know the answer, because I just don't know enough about this. But what is, I guess, from start to finish of like, I know every building is different because of the sizing, but like typically, like how long does this process take? Like, does it just kind of go along the same, as they're actually constructing and getting everything else up, or what's that like time frame like for all of this?
So for it really, again, it depends on the size of the building. For example, we did a building down in Columbus, Ohio, that was a 30-story hotel. And from start to finish, it was probably about 2.5 years from them when they started breaking ground to final testing.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's regulation issues. Sometimes it's permitting issues. That was also during COVID. So that played a huge part in it. They were having manpower issues, just trying to get people in there to work and, work long enough and safely, and all that mess that we hopefully will never happen again. But some buildings, they can get done in a year. Some can get done in 6 months. It really just depends on the size. But when we get involved, typically they'll break ground. So they'll do all the dirt work. They'll build whatever basement, if they're going to build a basement. They put up the framework. Once they can enclose the building and get it where it's not raining inside of the building, and floors and some walls, then we can start roughing in some of our pipe that goes inside of it before the drywallers go in. So we can put conduit in the walls, put boxes in, and then the drywallers come in. And then once they're in, we can go and start running some wire. And then once things get finished painted, we can then start installing the devices, because a lot of the devices that we have, like this, are basically finished where they need to go up last. Plus, we don't want our devices to get dirty.
Yep.
So if we have a smoke detector in there, we don't want all the drywall dust and all the cleaning, and it becomes an issue. And it's actually, per code, you're not allowed to really put them in until the very end. So we're kind of there from the middle to the end, I would say. But we are pretty much the last person out the door. So it's pretty much all trades are done. And then the fire alarm guys are the ones that sign off, and then they'll start moving furniture in the day after we're out of there. So we're really kind of the last person standing in a construction project.
Yeah. And then what happens if, I know you mentioned that the codes get updated like roughly every 3 years. What happens if you started buildings in works, you're already in there, you're doing some of while the drywall is going up, but let's say a new code book comes out. Do they have to, how does that work?
Good question. So what happens is we get the system approved. We don't start the installation until it's approved, purposefully, so that doesn't happen.
Gotcha.
We had that happen last year when the codes, or actually it was earlier this year, when the codes changed from 2017 to 2022. So there was a big change that could have affected projects. But if that project was approved before March 1st, 2024, it's based on the 2017 codes.
Gotcha.
March 2nd, it's now based on the 2022 codes. So there was a big rush to get a lot of projects approved by the end of February, or whenever it was, end of February, end of March, to make sure nobody got hit by that. But I'm sure some people did have to make some, quick changes and add a few devices here or there. And, that's just kind of the name of the game.
Yeah, definitely.
But,
when the codes get updated, well, maybe you can actually talk a little bit more about that. I know you mentioned you work with NFPA for their code books, but is that a voting system, or how do those get updated? And do you see major updates in between, or what's
there can be. It kind of depends on how old the code book is. Usually the older it's, the longer it's been around, the less changes that there are going to be. NFPA 72, which is for fire alarms, for specifically what we're talking about, it's been around forever. I mean, it's very old. Changes happen, but it's very slow to get changes to happen. And most changes that happen are based on technology lately.
Yeah.
There's been changes with dialers. So the way that a fire panel, so this fire panel right here, this is actually connected to the internet. So I've got a cable down here that's connected to our Ethernet, and I have there's a card in there that will actually connect to the internet, and it will send a signal to my phone if that panel goes into alarm. So that's a newer technology. So NFPA wasn't really designed for that because it didn't exist. So things like that need to get updated in NFPA as these types of situations happen. We had an issue a few years ago where the phone lines, so everybody's switching to cellular, everything's switching to internet-based phones and things like that, where you'll bundle with your cable company, your home phone, but who has a home phone anymore, really? But the fire panels required home phones. So that became a big issue where they kind of cut the copper lines that everybody used to have, and everything's digital now. Well, a lot of the panels couldn't handle that. So they had to make changes to the panels and update it. So now we actually have panels that are monitored through cellular, through internet. And that was kind of a big shakeup in the NFPA 72 because it wasn't acceptable back then. You had to have 2 phone lines. That was just the standard for decades. So that's been kind of kicking and screaming through to get that to be the right way. And it's been that way for a little while now, but that's kind of one of the major things. I mean, there's entire 2-hour presentations on changes in NFPA. There's some that are teeny tiny and some that are huge. One brand that we work with has a detector that's a self-testing detector where it actually has a piece of wax inside of the detector that will melt and create a little tiny puff of smoke inside the smoke detector. Oh, wow. So that's something new that is new technology that's okay to use, but that, has to get through all the regulations and everything. So there's things like that. And as far as how do these things get approved, there is voting. So you have a large group of people, I don't even know, I think 30 people, 40 people that are in these groups for each one of these standards. And there's, I don't know, 1,000 different standards. And you'll have what they call first draft, second draft, and then the final draft of the actual NFPA, where the first draft you'll have public can make comments. They can make suggestions on what they want to see changed. It might be as simple as changing a word from shall to should, or I don't know, a reference to a different code that may be changed. But some people want to add new products into the NFPA where they say, hey, we think this product fits into here and we sell it and other people sell it. So we want it to be part of the code so it'll be accepted. So they'll do presentations at the meetings and we will sit there and listen to the presentations, discuss it, and sometimes discuss it way too much and have to be held back a little bit. But finally, we'll make decisions, and then they send out what they call a ballot, where we actually vote on yay or nay on whether they're going to accept these changes or not, which currently I have to do by Friday for the one that I'm on. So I may be working on that this afternoon.
Right after the podcast, you can go. Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. So, once everything gets installed, in the building opens or whatnot, how often does the fire, not just the smoke detectors, but the whole fire alarm system get tested? And is that something that Summit Fire and Security does, or how does that work?
Yes. So on a fire alarm system, you have in what they call an inspection, and then you have a visual inspection. So there are some requirements that the customer has to do, and then there's some requirements that we do. The customer is responsible for the visual tests. So certain things like they have to go look and make sure, hey, is the screen actually working? Is it lit up? Is there power to it? Are the batteries still there? No devices are damaged. Look around, make sure nobody hit something with a tow motor. Sometimes you can damage a device, but the panel doesn't necessarily know that the device is damaged. So it's just like a quick visual inspection. You're supposed to go around, make sure everything looks normal. And then it varies anywhere from monthly to quarterly to semi-annually to every year. And then there's the actual testing. So in NFPA 72, in Chapter 14, it'll tell you everything, what needs to be tested and how often. Some devices need to be tested twice a year, such as like the sprinkler water flow switches are supposed to be tested twice a year to make sure that those are functional, because those are huge as far as importance. It's all important, but those are, very important that your sprinkler system's up to code and functioning. Sometimes we do that for them. So sometimes customers will have us come out quarterly, or we'll come out twice a year, or we just come out annually, depending on what they want. And if they have people that are capable of doing it themselves, some industrial buildings have a really good maintenance department where they're they can handle it. they can do it themselves. We can show them how to do it if they have questions. If they find something's not working, they'll call us and we'll come out and service it. But on our annual inspection, what we do is we test all the smoke detectors. We're supposed to test it with smoke to verify that actual smoke goes into there. So it's a synthetic smoke, smoke in a can, they call it. We're supposed to set off the horn strobes and all the flashing lights and make all the noise and annoy everybody. And it's all that stuff that everybody loves for us to do. And we get hated, once a year in most commercial buildings, but everybody will complain. It's funny. We get people complaining it's too loud or it's too quiet. And it's just like, okay, well, we do have some volume controls where we can bump it up a little bit or we can bump it down a little bit, but there's certain regulations that we have to follow as far as sound pressure coming out of these devices. So we have to make sure that it's meeting code. Typically we don't turn it down, but we've been able to before. And then, so annually we test all the smoke detectors, all the audible and visual devices. Sometimes there's speaker systems, which are a voice system where it'll actually play a voice message. Yeah. So we have to play that voice message to make sure it's working correctly, that it sounds correctly. There's something called intelligibility, where we have to make sure that you can actually understand what it's saying. Not that it's just playing a message, but that you can go stand in a busy mall and hear what it's saying. We have to test the elevator recall to make sure that functions correctly. Because the elevator recall is kind of funny, where you'll have a 6-story building and you'll have a smoke detector at the bottom floor. Well, if that smoke detector goes off, you don't want the elevator going all the way to the bottom floor. You want it to go to an alternate floor. So it'll actually go to the floor above it usually. And then if you have a smoke detector that goes off at the second floor to the top, that'll kick it down to the first floor. So we have to make sure that programming is correct, because that could be critical, that the doors don't open into, an inferno. And, we don't want anybody getting injured because it's not tested correctly or programmed correctly. We have to test that the sprinkler system is connected and make sure that that's functioning. Any suppression systems, we have to make sure it's reporting. And then if there's smoke control system, like I was saying with the fans, we got to make sure that that's functioning correctly as well. So we do that every year. And yes, Summit does handle all of that. We do pretty much anything you can think of fire protection when it comes to fire extinguishers, smoke detectors, sprinkler systems, restaurant systems, hood cleaning, clean agent systems, dry chemical systems, and security systems as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So again, this may be a dumb question, but you say, let's say a building has to get inspected every year.
Okay.
Let's say they don't have you come and do it. They do it on their own. How, do we know that it's actually getting done, like as consumers? Like, how can we make sure when we go into buildings that they're actually safe and they're maintaining what they should be maintaining?
So this is an old one, but this is from a company that I used to work for, my dad's company. Custom Engineered Fire Systems was the original company I started with. This is called an inspection tag. So these tags have what we tested, the year and the month that we tested it in, and if everything's good to go. So every certified company that's a fire protection company has to have tags. Some systems have tags. Some systems have stickers that go on the sprinkler valves that show all of the testing that we've done on that. And then we also have, stickers for the monitoring information. So I can explain that in a second. But so a customer is not allowed to do their own inspection. It has to be a certified company.
Gotcha.
And that's basically the way that you would know as a non-suppression fire protection person is if there's a tag hanging on there, look at the date. On the fire extinguishers, every fire extinguisher has a tag. You should be able to see that there's a tag that has a date with the year and the month of when it was last serviced, and it should be within a year from when you're there. Gotcha. So if you see that it says, oh, it's been 4 years since it was inspected, then maybe that's not the greatest building to be in, or a hotel or things like that. But again, the fire department, they do a really good job going around building to building. They can just, no call, no show, walk into a building and go through and check all the emergency lights, the exit lights. That's something else we do. make sure that those are functioning correctly, make sure all the tags are up to date on all the extinguishers and the fire panels and the sprinkler systems. So they're looking out for you. They're kind of your first line of defense before you go into a building. It should have been checked somewhat recently. They're supposed to, I think, go to every building throughout the year, but some cities are huge and it's hard to get to everything. But
for sure.
But yeah, they do their best to get in and make sure you're good to go. And we do too, because we want to get the revenue from doing the inspections. So, we don't want to let things go too long. So we try and keep up with our customer list, and, we've got our software system gives us a notification when somebody's due for inspection. So we will call and reach out. We've got our techs that they'll get a list of work for the month, and it'll be their job to reach out to the customers and make sure that, they're letting them in on time.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny you mentioned with the exit sign, right? And it lights up. Is that what it is? Yeah. My husband, his dad was a fire chief. So we're a very fire safety household. But when we're out and about places, he always goes up, and I yell at him every time because he clicks the button. Yeah, every time to see if it's working.
Yeah. I mean, it's good to know because, it may seem silly when there's nothing going on, but when there's an actual fire, that smoke, it fills from the top down in a hallway. So you can't see where you're going. And if you're in, some of these huge hotels, I don't know if you've ever been to any large convention centers. They'll have 4 or 5 turns before you get anywhere near an exit, and you have no idea where you're going.
I don't know where I'm going in those buildings when there's no fire, let alone when I can't see anything.
Right. And it is important that those exit signs, you need to understand how to read them too. Because the exit will have, and they're not great. I think they probably could do a better job with them, but it just says the word exit and it has a little tiny arrow on both sides, and you're supposed to remove part of the arrow so it tells you which way to go. So you need to, as a person going into a building, understand how an exit sign even works, because just because it says exit doesn't mean that's the exit. It's sometimes just an arrow pointing you towards the exit. So you really need to understand what you're even looking at. But that's kind of the biggest thing when you're in a building. Always make sure you know your exits, know where you're going, where you came from, the quickest way out of the building. Try not to get lost while you're going to your room or wherever you're going. So that way, how to get back.
Yeah. And that was actually going to be one of the questions I wanted to ask of, just as consumers going into buildings, obviously knowing, especially when I think of hotels, we want to know where the exit route is, where the closest stairwell is. Are there any other things that we should be looking out for? Obviously, we can also look out for those tags that you showed. But what else can we be doing, to make sure we're staying in safe places, we're visiting safe places, we're working in safe places?
Sure. So again, always be aware of your exits. Make sure you know how to get out of the building, because that's the easiest way to be safe, is to get out. You always want to read any signs near the stairwells and elevators. Make sure this elevator's, it doesn't necessarily say controlled by a smoke alarm system, but if you look up above the elevator door, if you see a smoke detector, know that elevator is not going to work if that fire alarm is going off. So know how to get to the stairwell. So sometimes in a big hotel, you may have your room right next to the elevator. You may walk out of the elevator and your room is right there. You don't even know where the exit is.
Yeah. Because
if that elevator is not functioning, you don't even know where you're going. So it might be in your best interest to maybe take a little walk down the hall and make sure hey, this hall could be 1,000 feet long this way, but it's only 20 feet long this way. Make sure which way is the closest exit to you. Big thing, don't smoke in a room that has a fire alarm system. Don't vape. Vaping will also set off smoke detectors. It takes a little longer, but it will accumulate in the room if you're doing heavy vaping, or if you blow directly into a smoke detector, which I don't know why you would do that, but that would set it off, and that could tie up valuable resources. If there's a false alarm, that fire department legally has to come to the building and respond. And now you've got 4 to 6 or 10 firemen standing in front of the building because you were doing something you shouldn't have done. And now if there's another issue on the other side of town, they may have less resources available to save a life or save somebody from being injured. So that's a huge one. If there's a voice system, make sure that you always listen to the instructions, because the instructions may not always tell you just to leave the building. They may tell you to avoid an area because maybe the west wing is blocked or it's on fire. So you want to go to the east wing, something like that. Some voice systems don't even tell you to exit the building. Some systems they call relocate systems, where they'll actually just tell you to go to a different area of the building because there's certain smoke doors that will drop and protect you, or there's fire doors that'll drop and protect you, that it may not be safer to go outside. It may be safer just to move over. Or if you're in a wheelchair, hey, go over to this, the west side of the building because it's safe over there. It's protected, things like that. And then they know where you're supposed to be so they can come help you get out of the building if you are in a wheelchair. Avoid the elevators because you don't know when they may stop working. If the fire alarm is going off, it doesn't necessarily always kill the elevators immediately. Sometimes it takes smoke propagating to the elevator area for it to drop it. So in an alarm situation, just avoid the elevators, use the stairwells. If you see something, say something, as they say. Sometimes the management of the building might not be aware of an issue. There could be things like broken devices that might not function correctly. You may have pull stations that are blocked by, somebody pushed a shelf in front of a bookcase or something in front of an exit pull station. Let them know, hey, I don't think that's supposed to be there. Can you maybe look into that? Because it might not work, or it might keep somebody from, preemptively warning somebody. But if the alarm does go off, don't assume it's a false alarm. They do happen, but check your surroundings, use your senses. If you smell smoke, obviously get out of the building. But, when the alarm goes off, get out of the building. If it's cold, sorry, but, it's better to be cold than to be injured,
Definitely.
So.
Definitely. Well, what are, I know we're coming up on our time here, but I have a few more cool questions. What types of buildings are like the hardest for you to work with? Is it like restaurants? Because I don't know, that to me sounds like more dangerous with the cooking and the grease and things like that. But what are like the hardest buildings to be working with?
So hardest buildings, it depends on your definition of hard. It could be hard customers to deal with. But as far as work goes, the really, really industrial buildings can get difficult. Sometimes you have, we've done some work in facilities that use jet fuel. So it's explosive areas, or if there's special chemicals that are in there that can be corrosive or hazardous. So we have to wear different personal protective equipment, PPE. That can be difficult to work in. When there's explosive areas, we have to run certain type of conduit called rigid conduit, which is explosion, class 1, div 1, they call it. It's prevents sparks from coming out of the conduit. So it's a special, more difficult to install conduit. Other places can be difficult because they're really dirty. Steel mills can be a real pain to work in because it's difficult to get to areas and they're filthy. You come out and I had a job once where I worked in it was a transformer vault, and it was just grease everywhere. And it was just literally, you start the day, you're wearing your clothes. At the end of the day, I wouldn't even bring them home and put them in the washing machine. I just would literally bring another set of clothes and throw my clothes away. Like, it was that, you're just covered. It was just disgusting. But we had to get in there. So we had to get in there and get the work done. So yeah, certain things like that. We've done some cool jobs that are difficult but interesting. I used to do some work in wind turbines.
Oh, wow.
So I would actually install suppression systems in wind turbines. So we would have to climb up to the top of the wind turbines and work in the electrical cabinets. We would put these small little suppression bottles in there. And that was cool. We had to go to special training for the climbing. We had to go to special training for rescue because when you're 300 feet in the air, the fire department can't reach you to help you. Their trucks, their ladders aren't tall enough. So you have to get trained on CPR. You have to get trained on rescue. You have to use kind of a buddy system to work with somebody else. But got to go to some pretty neat places. Did some work up in New Hampshire where we were up on top of a mountain, on top of a wind turbine, 275 feet in the air. Pop the hood open. It's just you and, Mother Nature. It's pretty amazing.
I don't like heights, so that sounds terrifying to me.
It's pretty safe for the wind turbines. It's not like a cell phone tower where you're climbing on the outside. You're actually climbing on the inside, and you're strapped to the ladder the whole time. So they have this little device that attaches to your harness that at most you would fall 2 feet.
Yeah,
but
well,
it's still a little scary looking on the inside.
I'll still leave that job to you. I don't need to be signing up to do that anytime soon.
Yeah, it's fun. So that was kind of something neat that we got to do. That was interesting but difficult at the same time because we had to learn a whole new set of safety rules, totally different safety equipment than what we would use on a normal commercial business. But yes, restaurants are difficult, especially the timing. That's another thing that is a big issue with a lot of things is when can we actually work somewhere? If we do work in schools, they don't want us there with the kids. So we have to either go super early or start our work at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and work after hours. So that can be difficult, but I totally understand. I don't want to cause any safety issues or concerns. Also in industrial applications, they don't always let us come out and work all the time because we have to shut down their production to be able to work in their machines. So that, loses them revenue while we're doing that. So that can be difficult.
Yeah, definitely. Well, on maybe a brighter note, what's your favorite part of your job that you get to do?
My favorite part is that I don't know everything and I'm learning something new almost every day. And I love the industry. I love the fact that I'm protecting property, and I love even more the fact that I'm protecting people. I like to think that we're kind of in there before the fire department. So it's kind of like we're part of the first responders team where our systems are the ones that are calling the fire department to come put out the fire. Hopefully the type of system that's in there actually starts to help them put out the fire ahead of time so they have less work to do. But I do really, look at us as part of the first responders team, which, it feels great at the end of the day, knowing that, you're protecting lives and saving buildings and things like that. And, we're all over the place. So we save all sorts of stuff. And it's cool to know, when there's a fire and our system put it out. We do a lot of suppression systems where we'll get a phone call saying, hey, your system went off. Like, oh no, what happened? I said, well, we had a fire. I said, is everything all right? And he said, yeah, I put it out. We just need you to recharge the system. And they're happy. They're happy they have to spend more money with us because our little, $2,000 system saved their $1 million machine. And it's a great relationship. It's a trusting relationship that we build with these customers once, they see us in action and know, hey, that was a good investment. Some customers don't like us at all because we just cost them money and it never goes off. But that's also a good thing too, because you don't have an issue. It's more like we're selling insurance, where insurance is great when you need it, but when you don't need it, it feels like a waste.
Yeah, definitely. I know we obviously we do a lot of advocacy work, especially with fire sprinklers right now, and making sure homes and apartment buildings and things like that have those. And it's so true. Like, yes, it's an investment, but it can save you millions of dollars down the road. I think we've all seen like the fire sprinkler, like put out the fire like so quickly in that room and whatever, that demo. But yeah, it really is an investment. And when you compare it to insurance, it's very true. Sometimes I get mad at my insurance bills, but at the end of the day, they are keeping me safe.
Well, I had a claim earlier this year at my house, and I'm glad I had homeowners insurance because it rebuilt my kitchen, which was great. So definitely worth the investment. But, I've owned a home for 23 years and I've never used it. It's just one of those things where, 23 years, it was worth it this year, and you look at it that way. And, for the next 20 years, you look back and say, hey, in 2024, remember that new kitchen we got? Yeah. Okay. It's still worth it.
Yeah. Well, and I know, especially for burn survivors, oftentimes we all think like, oh, it's not going to happen to us. Like, this isn't going to happen in my building or my home. It's just not going to happen. But, it does happen. And you'd rather be prepared and over prepared than not prepared at all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the clocks are changing soon, so remember,
Yes.
change your batteries in your smoke alarm.
Yes,
so
definitely. It's
twice
a
a year.
great time to test, especially this week. And like you said, the changing the clocks, I think, is like in less than a month. So coming up here soon. Well, I will get to our final questions here in a moment. But I know when I read your bio, you work specifically in Ohio, correct?
Correct.
But Summit Fire and Security has locations all over the country. We'll make sure, we have the website linked below, their contact information. But if folks, maybe they're from Ohio or not, if they want to get in touch with you, Steve, or, your location, what's the best way for folks to get in contact with you and Summit?
So you can go to Summit's website, which is on there, and I believe you just click on the locations tab or button, and it'll pull up a map of everywhere that we're at, and on there it'll have all of our contact info. I think almost every branch has a different phone number, so go in there and find the branch phone number, and we'll have somebody answer live, and you'll be able to talk to somebody, and you can get to the right person quickly, and we'll get you taken care of. But yeah, we are all over the country. I mean, we're from ocean to ocean, and Canada to Mexico, and we cover it all. I don't think we're doing anything in Alaska and Hawaii, but I wouldn't mind taking over the Hawaiian branch if we ever get one of those. But
right, we have a great next door hospital in Hawaii, so maybe we'll let them know, and you can go out to Hawaii for a little.
There we go.
Awesome. Well, before I do ask you our two final questions, do you have anything else you want to share with me or listeners? Anything at all?
I know one thing I haven't mentioned, but I'm part of another association, or Summit's part of another association that I've been a part of for years, called the FSSA. That's the Fire Suppression Systems Association. They do great things throughout the country. It's a good association that's almost every fire protection company in the country is a part of, all the major ones. Just a quick shout out to them. And if anybody wants to look into that, it's fssa.net. I am currently sitting on the board for that association. So I've been heavily involved for at least 12 years now, and they do great things. They do some scholarships. And they've done a lot of scholarships, I think, with University of Maryland, and they've got other scholarships available for anybody, and it's all on their website. So if anybody's looking to get into the fire protection industry and you're pursuing a career in that, they've got some scholarships that they can help you out with for college. So.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely make sure we have their website in our show notes. It's a great opportunity for folks who want to get more involved or pursuing a career. So yeah, we'll make sure we have that linked below.
Perfect.
So with all that said, we do always ask our guests two quick final questions. Normally Amber gets to ask the first one, but she's not here today. So I get the lovely task of asking both. But our first question is, what is one thing you'd want the world to know about the fire protection industry?
One thing I'd want them to know is that we're here to help. We're here to keep people safe. We're here to keep property safe. We're huge. We're everywhere. I mean, it's an international industry. It's all over the entire planet. It's not just something that happens in the United States. There's international codes. There's codes that are strictly for the United States, and then each state has its own codes. But our job is really to be here for you. We're not here for us. We're here to make sure everybody's safe and keep everybody up to date on everything.
Definitely. That's amazing. And then, so our final question, which is our Phoenix partner question, which today is sponsored by Summit Fire and Security, is, so I did a throwback to last season's question. So it's really unrelated to everything we talked about, but what is one thing that always puts a smile on your face, no matter how tough your day's been?
That's a good question. I mean, I love going home. I mean, I've spent a lot of time, been in my home for about 14 years, and have spent a lot of time. We've got some pretty amazing gardens. We've got an amazing backyard, a nice pool. It's just nice to go home and relax with my girlfriend and just kind of kick back, sit on the porch, and talk about our days. She actually works for Summit as well.
Awesome.
So we have a lot of too many work conversations, but it's good to bounce things off of each other sometimes. But that's kind of my happy place. Be at home and just enjoy nature. I've got 3 acres, and I think we've got something like 15 flower gardens throughout the entire property. It's
Oh my
a lot
gosh,
to keep up with, but it's pretty amazing to walk around, and we've got really cool neighbors that we hang out with too. So it's nice to kind of live out a little bit further from the city. We're about half an hour out of the city, so it's just kind of the nice little quiet area. So that's what I look forward to most days.
Yep. No, I can relate to that. There's nothing about just being outside on a beautiful day. I love fall. Fall is my favorite season. So it's like the perfect time to just be outside and relax. We definitely don't do enough of that sometimes. So
right.
Yeah. Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you to Summit Fire and Security for sponsoring today's podcast and inviting you on. It's been, like I said earlier, I always love learning more about, especially on the commercial side, because I don't think about it enough, which maybe is a bad thing. But, I love that there's teams like Summit and you that can go out there and make sure that we're staying safe and protected. So, just thank you so much. And just a reminder to our listeners, it is Fire Prevention Week. So be sure you're following Phoenix Society and Summit Fire and Security on social to learn more about smoke alarms, how you can stay safe and get more involved. So it's been such a great episode getting to know you, Steve, and learning more about Summit.
Thank you for having me. And, anything we can do to help, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll get you guys taken care of. So
Awesome.
Everybody stay safe out there, and thank you for having us. We really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this.
Of course. Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Girls with Grafts. If you are enjoying this content, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.